Hello friends. So I keep getting requests to make videos or write blogs on specific topics. And one of the topics which I have got requests is around the banking, or better to say lending sector, in terms of explaining how this works. And because a banking or a lending business annual report or the P&L balance sheet statement, it's very different from other sectors. There is a lot of clarity required about it, how to interpret it, and there are a lot of financial ratios. There are a lot of jargons around that, which usually a normal person finds difficult to understand. So I thought to cover all of that in this video, and I have tried to simplify it as much as possible to provide more visual to explain how all of this works. So we will cover how the bank and lending business works. We will cover some of the key KPIs while analyzing any banking stock or any lending business. What are the key KPIs one must take into mind? And based on my last few years of experience, what is my experience with banking sector? Like what to look for while we are trying to study a banking sector? And my experience has been on the both sides. I have made some money. I have lost a good amount of money, and I have lost the money which was there in a lot of profit, but I couldn't book it. So I think this is an interesting sector, and I will share some of my experiences. So first thing first, how the banking business works. But before that, please note that I'm not a SEBI registered advisor. There are a lot of stocks which we will use in this discussion. I may own some of these stocks, but one needs to do their own research and due diligence. So first thing, how the whole lending business works and why the kind of what are the numbers which you see, how those numbers and those ratios emerge. So if we can simplify it, in a banking business, basically you take money from somebody and you lend money to somebody. So if I am a bank and I am in the lending business, I will take money from someone whom I will pay a specific amount, and the same money which I have taken, I will lend it to somebody at a specific rate. So to ensure that I make profit, the rate at which I am taking the money and the rate at which I am lending the money. Of course, the lending rate has to be higher than the taking rate so that I can make some profit out of it. And then on that money earned, I'll be able to manage my expenses and all, and then I need to make ultimate profits. So basically, that is how the banking business works. So the first thing is to lend money, you need money. So banks to lend or financial institutions lending in business to lend money, they need money. And that side is called cost of deposit because you are taking deposit from somebody so that you can lend that money to somebody else and then you can charge and make profit. So because you are taking money from somebody, it is a liability to the bank because the bank is responsible to return that money someday. So let us say if you go in the bank and you open a FD account and the bank has decided to give you 6% of annual interest every year. Whenever you want to close your account, maybe within a year or after 2 years, based on when do you close it, ultimately it is the bank's responsibility to return you the money. आपको वो पैसा बैंक को वापस लौटाना है, and that is why it is the liability for bank because the bank is liable to return you that money. वो पैसा बैंक का नहीं है, वो पैसा आपका है और बैंक liable है आपको पैसे लौटाने के लिए. So the rate at which the bank takes that deposit, that is called cost of deposit. So agar bank is giving you 6% interest on your FD, then 6% is the cost of deposit. The other way banks can raise money is through the equity. So let us say bank has taken deposits of 80 rupees and the bank has brought equity of 20 rupees. So this 80 rupee plus 20 rupee, 100 rupees the total amount which bank may or may not be able to lend because there are a lot of regulations from RBI, how much of money banks can lend, how much they need to preserve and all of that. So we will not get into that. We will keep it simple. But if you assume simply, if there are no regulations in place and all, they can lend this whole amount of money. And this 80 rupee which the bank has in the form of deposit, and this 20 rupee which is in the form of equity. So there's a leverage which is 4:1. On the other side, the bank, let's say if the bank has raised the money, then they have certain operations, because people need to go to the bank to take their interest, to to submit their deposit, or they can have branches where relationship managers, they can disburse loan. So there's operations, there is IT system, all of that happens. And then after taking this money in the form of debt or equity, they need to provide loans. And they might provide loans to the companies, they might provide loans to the people. Like हमें personal loans मिलते हैं, या फिर companies loan लेती हैं plants बनाने के लिए, capex करने के लिए. So these are different kinds of loans, and it is called loans and advances. Now this is an asset to the bank, because this is the money which bank has given to somebody, but ultimately that person or that entity or that company, they have to pay this back to the bank along with interest and principal. So this lending amount is an asset to the bank. So I hope now you understand why the deposit is a liability and why the loans and advances in an asset. Because बैंक की liability है लोगों को deposit वापस करने की, और बैंक का अधिकार है कि वो जो भी लोन दिया है वो बाद में recover करे. So it is a asset. Okay. And the rate of interest at which the bank gives the loan, that is called yield on advances. So if a bank takes gives deposit if bank takes deposit at 6% rate, and the bank lends that same money plus equity at a 12% rate, then we can say the cost of deposit is 6% and yield of advances is 12%. So basically the bank makes a spread of 12 minus 6%, and of course there'll be expenses to manage, which the bank has to manage within that 6%, and then finally generate a profit. So let's take an example. So let us say the cost of deposit is 6%. And let us say there is total 90 rupees of deposit taken. And let us say there is 10 rupee of equity which the bank has put. So totally the bank has 100 rupee which they can lend. So the total liability to the debt and equity holders. The debt is basically the people who have given their deposit, and equity is basically the equity investors. So the total liability is 90 plus 10, 100, which means the bank can lend this 100 rupee. And I'm explaining in very, very simpler terms. There could be a lot of complications, and there are, I don't want to get into it for the simplicity. So take it as a very simple example. And the leverage is basically 90 divided by 10, which is 9:1. And the cost of deposit is basically 6%, because the people who have given this 90 rupees deposit, they need to earn an interest rate of 6%. On the lending side, let us say for simplicity, all the 100 rupees of liability which the bank has taken, if if the bank can give this 100 rupee as loan, and if the bank is giving this as a loan to maybe retail clients, or maybe companies, and it is giving the loan as 12%, then we can say the yield on advances is 12% and loan given is 100. Now what happens? So let us assume a scenario that the bank gives this full 100 rupee raised in the form of loan. So loan given is 100 rupees. Now we know that this loan has been given at 12% yield on advance. So if the bank has given this loan on 12%, it means in a given year, the bank will earn an interest of rupees 12 on rupees 100 based on this 12%. So this is where we call it item number 3, which is interest earned, which we call net income. So for the bank, the net income or the revenue source is basically the interest earned on the loan given, which is basically on the loan given yield on advances, which is 12 rupees here. And this is what you will see in the bank PNL when you read a bank PNL. Now the bank has to also provide the 6% deposit rate to its deposit holders. So for this 90 rupee at 6%, this 90 rupee at 6%, the bank needs to pay the interest to its deposit holders. which we call interest expense, because they are taking money, they're giving money. The interest on given money is interest earned. The interest expensed on the deposits is interest expense. And at 6% of 90, this becomes rupees 5.4. This is item number 4. So we have interest earned, we have interest expense. So the difference of interest earned and interest expense, we will come to that. But this is not the only expense which the bank needs to meet, because this expense is just for the depositors. But the bank also has an operation. They might need to spend on IT system. They might need to spend on employees. उनको थोड़ी marketing करनी होगी. They will have administrative expenses. So let us say all the operating expenses. And when we say operating expenses, it means the employee salary, the IT expenses, the rental expenses, and all the marketing expenses, sales expenses, all of those operating expenses, let's say they spend 3 rupees. So if they are earning 12 rupees as interest, first they are expensing this 5.4 rupees as interest for the depositors. And then there is an operating expense of 3 rupees to manage the operations. Now, when the bank gives loan, this 100 rupee loan, it's not like this, they will give this loan to one person or one company. They will spread it. And again, there are rules and regulations, how much you can lend to a person, how much you can lend to a company, how much you can lend to a business group, how much you can lend to a sector. And, every bank has its own risk division, which tries to take a call how to diversify these loans. So basically, because these loans are spread across multiple customers, uh, the idea is basically to diversify, because somebody might default. And if somebody is going to default, they would like to have the books diversified. So the banks need to provision what is the percentage of loan they're expecting, to convert into a NPA. NPA means the bank will not be able to recover that loan. So if they have given a 100 rupee loan, the bank is expecting that 1 rupee will not get recovered based on their historic experience, based on the sector study, based on the lending study, whether it's a home loan, whether it's credit card loan, based on whatever analysis, they have taken a call that maybe 1%, 1 rupee of loan, which is 1%, could not be recovered. And hence, they are provisioning it. Like, I am reducing this 1 rupee from my profit because I know I will not recover, because it's not like all the loans given will be repaid in single year. They might get repaid in 4-year tenure, 10-year tenure, 20-year tenure. So the bank is expecting that the 1 rupee will not come, and they're making adequate provision for that, so that later on it doesn't come as a surprise. They are already factoring in. This is called provisioning for NPA. So now you have three kinds of expenses. If you see, you have expense for interest, you have expense for operations, and you have expense which is basically a provision to whatever money they are expecting which will not be recovered. And if you reduce all of these three from this 12 rupees, then you get 5.4 plus 3, 8.4 plus 1, 9.4, 12 minus 9.4 rupees 2.6. This is your profit before tax. Again, for simplicity, I am just assuming there is a zero tax. So let us say this becomes your profit after tax. So ultimately, on doing a business of deposit taken 90 rupee, equity taken 10 rupee, on a total liability of 100 rupee, which is totally given as loan at 12% rate. Finally, on this 100 rupee management, the bank is finally making 2.6 rupee of profit. Given they are expecting that 1% of this loan will turn into NPA. So I hope now you understand how the bank operates and how the PNL of a bank looks like and how they make money. Now let's come to the different kinds of ratios. So the first thing is interest spread. So basically the interest spread is nothing but the spread between interest earned and interest expensed. So your interest earned is 12 rupee and interest expense is 5.4 rupee. Uh, Sorry, interest spread is in terms of percentage. So basically the rate at which you are getting your deposits and the rate at which you are giving your loan as advances. So bigger the gap, more beneficial it is for the bank, because the chances of making money becomes higher. Again, there could be a lot of risk. If somebody is giving a loan at a 20%, 30%, the question is, why is bank giving loan at 30%? Because 30% might be too high. And why nobody, why this person is taking loan at 30%. But keeping all in mind, if the spread is good, which means there are higher chances of managing the operation and generating a profit, but it has its own optimum levels. It's not a linear thing. A spread which is too low is also bad because it's very difficult then to manage the operation, or it might mean that the bank is very tight. They just want to grab market share. The question comes, if the spread is low, whether the cost of deposit is high or the yield on advances is low, all that analysis is required. And if the spread is too high, that also raises questions that why the spread is high, why they need to lend at a very high rate, because your cost of deposits usually remains constant. I mean, there is a lower limit and then it can only go higher. So this is what you call interest spread. So here 12% minus 6%, 6% becomes the interest spread. This is item number 8. The next thing is net interest margin. So what is net interest margin is, net interest is basically your interest earned minus interest expense. So net, what is the interest they earn? That is 12 minus 5.4. And margin means with respect to something. So with respect to the average loan. So again, instead of total asset, this will become average asset, which will be more like in the asset in the beginning of the year and asset in the end of the year, the mean of that. But again, for simplicity, I'm just taking asset. So basically asset is the loan given. So if they have given 100 rupee of loan and they are generating net interest of 12 minus 5.4 rupee. So this 12 minus 5.4 is almost 6.6 divided by 100. So net interest margin becomes 6.6%. Then you will hear about this term called cost to income ratio. Now, cost to income ratio is nothing but your operating expenses. So you see this item expense, and we said this expense is basically to manage the operations. And we said there are three kinds of expenses which are happening: one on the interest side, one on the core operation side, and then there's a provisioning. So this core operations expense, which is for the employee salary, for the marketing, for the sales, and for the other expenses, that is what is operating expenses. So your item number 5, which is operating expenses, divided by 3 minus 4, which is the operating income, because your core operations is lending. So you take deposit and you lend money. So on the deposit, you pay the interest. On the loan, you get the interest. So your core operations is this lending business. So your net income is interest earned minus interest expense. So this operating expenses by, you can say, operating income, which is 3 minus 4. So 5 divided by 3 minus 4 is your cost to income ratio, because this is the core operations cost and this is the core operation income. This is how you should say. So this becomes your cost to income ratio. So in this case, if you see, 3 is your expense and 12 minus 5.4, 6.6 is your income. So you can say 3 divided by 6.6, which should be somewhere around maybe 50%. That is your cost to income ratio. Next comes credit cost. Credit cost is like what is the provisioning which has been done on the total asset. So like this bank is expecting that 1 rupee of loan will become NPA out of 100 rupee of loan given. So the credit cost is 1%. Now this credit cost differs based on different kind of lending type. Like a home loan will have very low credit cost, because if you see, people default very less on home loan. But if you take a personal loan, the default rate will be higher. Or if you take a credit card based loan, the default rate might be higher. So there are different kinds of loan and there are different kinds of credit cost as per industry norms. We need to, and when a bank operates, the bank can lend in 10 different segments. So we should see what is the average credit cost of multiple banks in that specific segment and then how one particular bank is doing. So that is how we analyze the credit cost. Next comes NPA, and we saw that. So NPA is basically if somebody has taken a loan and he had to do the payment, but if he doesn't do payment, interest payment for 90 days, then that loan becomes a NPA. And then there are different stages of NPA. And again, you can go to the RBI site and you can read, or I will try to cover in next video. But first, it becomes like in simpler terms, if the borrower is not paying the interest for 90 days, it becomes a gross NPA, which is non-performing asset. Now this is what is called loan not paid gross non-performing asset. Now you see the bank is already making a provision of 1 rupee. So let us say if the bank had gross non-performing asset for 2.2 rupee and it has already made a provision for 1 rupee, which means it has already taken care of 1 rupee out of 2.2 rupee, even if that money is a return of money, like if they need to write it off, still it has been taken care. So that is why you have net NPA, which is gross NPA minus the provision done for NPA, which means net net, this is the NPA which has not been provisioned. And if this money doesn't come back, this is going to be the write-off. So this is what NPA means. Then we have provision coverage. Provision coverage is how much of NPA has already been provisioned. So like if you see the gross NPA is 2.2 rupee and 1 rupee has been provisioned, it means 1 divided by 2.2 rupee has been provisioned. Means still there is more than 50% of money which is not provisioned. And if that really becomes, if that is really cannot be recovered, then there are going to be additional losses in future because that is not been provisioned. So ideally, a bank should have 100% provision coverage ratio, but no bank follows it because not everything becomes, whatever is net NPA, something gets recovered. So ideally, it is said that, a 70-80% provision coverage ratio is good because if you have already covered for 70-80% by provisioning, whatever net NPA is there, maybe even if you recover 20-30%, then you're good to go. But not all the banks, have that kind of provision coverage ratio. So again, this is a very, very important metric to track which banks have, high provision coverage ratio, which banks have low provision coverage ratio. And still, despite of, having NPA number, despite of having good provision coverage, still, banks can, surprise you. That is called evergreening of loan. Maybe you are not even declaring something which is an NPA. You are not declaring as NPA because you are playing with it. Because somebody who is going to default, maybe you are lending him again, and okay, you are going to default on 100 rupee. Let me give you a fresh loan, and again that loan goes for 2 years. Again, you keep giving him a fresh loan. So you are evergreening the loan, and you are never allowing it to come into NPA. So those kind of surprises can also happen. And that is why, however you read bank balance sheet and P&L statement and all, it is very, very important to do some groundwork on the bank and to get some image of the bank, how the image, how the bank is managing money. Because the kind of complicated structures there, a lot of things could be still hidden behind these numbers despite doing all this analysis. But like this is the first step. This though you have to must analyze, and over and above that, still there is a possibility that a lot could be hidden. So ideally, a bank which is generating decent profit on the loans given has a lower amount of NPA, has provision for all the loan. The provision coverage ratio is very high. Typically, they are good signs of bank, and we'll see some of the ratios. So the next two most important ratios are return on asset. So basically, what is the final profit after tax the bank has made after the spread, after the core operation expenses, and after the provisioning? That is the final profit. And on what asset that profit has been made, basically. So this bank is making 2.6 rupee profit on 100 rupee of asset. So its return on asset becomes 2.6%, which is your return on asset. And then comes return on equity, which is what the equity shareholders are making. So the same profit divided by shareholders equity, which is the share of equity shareholder, which is your the equity plus your reserves and surplus. That is what is your return on equity. So this tells overall on the overall asset how sound the profit is. This tells for a equity shareholder whether it is generating a decent amount or not, which is again typically should be above 12%, because in FD itself you will get 6-7%. And then given the kind of market risk you are carrying, by making this investment, you should get some kind of risk premium, and that is why 12% should be considered a decent number. So I hope now you can understand how this whole thing works, how the whole PNL gets calculated, how all these kind of various terms and various KPIs which we hear, how each of these are calculated. So this is like one slide which cover this end to end. And I hope now you have a better clarity. And a lot of these things we cover in our course. So we have multiple courses in scientific investing. We have multiple learning tracks. And one of the courses which we have is for fundamental analysis, which is a 30-hour course where we cover right from the very basic. Even if one doesn't know anything, we start from the scratch of understanding the financial statements, the P&L balance sheet. Then we get into financial ratios, which are derivative of these financial statements, and it is used heavily in doing any kind of company analysis we do. We try to analyze the profitability, leverage, operational growth, due diligence, valuation, different kind of ratios. We also cover 20 years of Indian stock market history through data, and we try to understand the patterns of wealth creation, wealth destruction, how the markets shape, how the sectors have performed, what are the winner sectors, what are the losing sectors. We try to put a framework to understand how to understand business, how to analyze businesses, how to analyze competitive advantages, how to analyze modes, how to understand the management, how to understand the levers of what are the qualities of a good management versus bad management. We also cover how to go about this whole research, like how to do a fundamental research in terms of a top down, whether you can start from a sector and go down to a company, or you can start from a company and go up, or how to do competitive research, and lots of case studies, lot of tools which we have built, a lot of external tools as well as internal tools. And then the whole concept of valuation. There are multiple valuation technique, what technique to use, when and where, and all of that. And finally the market cycle and portfolio management and position sizing and all of that. So this is what we cover in the 30-hour comprehensive course. Do look at our website. We also have a webinar where we have covered all our course and tracks in detail. So the next thing is KPIs. What are the KPIs, key KPIs? So as I said, return on asset, return on equity, and provision coverage ratio. I consider these three as most important. And here you can see how the best of the banks they have fared. And this is mean return on equity, which is basically the return on equity of last few years, where we have taken last 7 years of pre-COVID mean equity number, because COVID has screwed the numbers. So that is why we have taken last 7 years of pre-COVID mean equity. And you can see HDFC Bank stands at the top, but the next bank which stands is basically City Union Bank, which is a lesser known bank, which is not in the top 10 banks. And then comes Kotak, and then you have other banks. If you see mean return on asset, then the Kotak Bank is number one, and HDFC is number two, and again City is number three, and then you have other banks. And so if you see whether it is return on equity or it is return on asset, which are two key metric, the top three banks are basically your HDFC, Kotak, and City Union Bank. And somewhere, if you see the valuation, you will see over years this has reflected in their valuations. And when we say why HDFC always, gets a premium, why Kotak gets a premium, the reason behind is these numbers. And these are not 1 year number, but these numbers have sustained for a long time. And next is leverage. Why leverage is important? Because if you understand DuPont analysis and all, there are multiple levers of return on equity, and return on asset is one, and leverage is one. So even if your return on asset is low, but if you can leverage it higher, which means if I go back to this slide, this is the leverage. So you take a lot of deposit, very less equity, and still you can lend. But this is a risky lending, because if you are leveraging and if you go wrong and you have high NPA, it can backfire. So a high leverage can increase your return on equity, can give you more profit, but if you screw it up, then it's a recipe for disaster. So banks who can make more return on equity despite of less leverage and high return on asset, securing that there is enough provision coverage, I think those banks are really good banks to look at. And some of these banks may not be pure play banks, and that is why the leverage number might be lower. Like Portal Bank, it's a combination of multiple kinds of business. It's not only lending, there's a brokerage, there's insurance, and there are a lot of things. So there's a reason why this looks very low. But the range, if you see, lies between 7.6 to 11.1. I have not bifurcated Kotak by business. If we bifurcate, of course, this number will increase. But you can see how the whole leverage changes and how it impacts return on equity. And this is the trend which you see over return on equity over years, where at least at an industry level, you can see over a period of time, the return on equities have gone down. But there are banks who have been able to maintain it consistently, like HDFC maintains it consistently, maybe 200-300 BPS fall. City Union, it is good, but in COVID, it has deteriorated. But Axis, things went wrong long back, and things deteriorated. Some of the other banks also, it has deteriorated. Some banks, they are trying to improve. Return on asset also, if we see Kotak also, I think we are much more consistent on the both sides. So Kotak, HDFC, they are good. Citi was good till COVID, but in COVID they have deteriorated it, and others, they have their ups and downs. Now, my 5 lessons from banking industry has been, I think when it comes to bank, the history is very, very important because the new banks, they look like to be the next HDFC, but the problem of new banks is they are not tested, they are not proven. As I said, there could be possibilities of evergreening of loans, and reading annual reports and all may not help. The loan itself might not be seasoned. When we say seasoned means the loan tenure itself might be for 10 years, and maybe the moratorium period. Now moratorium period is like the period which is given when companies don't need to pay back. They can take a 2-year moratorium and then they can start paying back. So if the loan is not seasoned, we'll not even know that the companies had their pressure to pay loan or not. So that is why history is very, very important, and how they have performed historically. So when it comes to bank, I think it is very, very important to look through a once bull and bear cycle, and especially how those banks performed in a bear cycle, because leverage business gets most stressed in the bear cycle, and that is what separates good banks from the bad bank. So the history is very, very important, and the nature is such that market keeps giving opportunities if we wait for the right time, rather than getting into new banks. Successful banking is more about risk management than sales management. Like, lending is very easy, collection is the difficult thing. And if you are playing a leverage game, and if you screw it up, and if your an NPS goes 4, 5, 6, 7%, then you are done. Half of your net worth is gone if you're highly leveraged, and that is why the risk management is very, very important. Also, banking is more about taking front-end disclosures than back-end surprises, because there are multiple ways to create back-end surprises. And good managements, they do better provision, they do front-end disclosures, they are more conservative in their accounting, and all sorts of things. So we should try to look for banks who do some kind of additional provisioning as a safety measure, whose provisional coverage ratios are respectable, whose assessment of NPA numbers and all, RBI has its own way of doing it. So are they short in terms of what RBI is calculating, or are their numbers at par with RBI? So there are a lot of analysis required, and how, what kind of disclosures the bank have in terms of transparency, in terms of providing the detail, that says a lot about the transparency. Successful banking is again about controlled growth, because lending is easier. You can easily grow at 30, 40, 50%, but recovering that money is difficult. And then, if the whole shareholders' money can get wiped off. So the growth is important, but then it is about controlled growth. And successful banking is more about avoiding this big mistake, because one big mistake takes you 3, 4, 5 years down the behind in the history. Like if you see the examples of microfinance, we see every 5 year one crisis happens, and uh, they say that you have to factor that in valuation, because every 5 year election or flood or something will happen that will wipe off 1 year of profit, and then again it goes to, it's like frog in the well who goes 5 steps up and 2 steps down, something of that sort. So the banks whose books are more granular, who are very well diversified, they are the one, by industry, by sector, by group, by segment. They are the one who can avoid big mistakes, because even if they make mistakes, those mistakes will be smaller. And that is where we should try to look at. And some of my personal experience I can share is, like, RBL has been one bank where based on the kind of things I heard on technology and all. Despite of a very short history, I was excited. But then ultimately, it's a small bank and 4 accounts turning bad, and it felt like pack of cards. And then there were things I didn't even analyze, like how leveraged the bank employee and executives were, where they had taken loans against the ESOPs, and when the prices fall, the whole pledge share and sale started happening. So there are a lot of things which goes beyond. It's not like it's a fraud bank. Like it's not like taking extreme measure what we hear in the market. This is a good bank, this is a fraud bank, and all. I think it's all genuine, but if we take care of these things, I think we will be better in our analysis, and we'll be able to make the right decisions when it comes to lending business. So this is how I'll end with these 5 learnings, and I hope to see you sometime soon in the next video. Thanks for watching, and if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe below. Also, we have a blog called Facts Beyond Numbers. You can subscribe to that. We write there. We have these courses and learning tracks. You can write to us at scientificinvesting1@gmail.com. And if you want to explore our LMS platform where we host these courses, you can click this link and you can subscribe. I will put this PPT also, and I'll put all these descriptions below the video. So do subscribe and follow us. Thank you.